The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace grounds as Kate Middleton stood at her bedroom window, watching the gardeners tend to the rose bushes below. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman who had aged gracefully through years of public service. But today something was different in her eyes. There was a quiet sadness, a weight that seemed to press down on her shoulders as she sipped her morning tea. William entered the room silently, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. He had been up since dawn, pacing the halls and thinking about the conversation they had shared the night before. The decision they had made together in the privacy of their sitting room would change everything. Not just for them, but for their children, for the monarchy, and for millions of people around the world who had followed their love story for over 2 decades. "The children are asking questions," Kate said softly, not turning from the window. "George noticed we've been having more private meetings lately. Charlotte asked why we look so serious all the time." Her voice carried the weight of a mother trying to protect her children from a truth that would inevitably reach them. William moved to stand beside her, his hand finding hers. They had always been partners in everything, from their university days at St. Andrews to their wedding that captivated the world, through the births of their children and the endless royal duties that had shaped their adult lives. Now they faced their greatest challenge yet, and they would face it together just as they always had. The decision had not come lightly. For months, they had discussed their future in hushed conversations after the children were asleep. The constant scrutiny, the pressure on their family, the way their every move was analyzed and critiqued by the media and the public. They had given their best years to the crown, had served with dignity and grace, but at what cost to their personal happiness and their children's normal development? Kate remembered the early days when everything felt like a fairy tale. The shy girl from Berkshire who had fallen in love with a prince, the wedding watched by billions, the joy of bringing their children into the world under the watchful eyes of a nation. But fairy tales, she had learned, don't prepare you for the reality of living every moment of your life in the public eye. "Do you remember what you told me on our wedding day?" William asked, his thumb tracing circles on her hand. "You said that whatever came next, we would handle it together, that we were stronger as a team than we could ever be alone." Kate smiled for the first time that morning, the memory bringing warmth to her heart. "I also said I would follow you anywhere, even if it meant giving up everything I had ever known." The irony wasn't lost on her now. Following him had meant embracing a life of service and duty, but now following him might mean walking away from it all. The palace around them hummed with its usual morning activity. Staff members went about their duties, preparing for another day of official engagements, meetings with government officials, and charity visits. None of them knew that the couple they served was contemplating a departure that would send shockwaves through the establishment and beyond. William's phone buzzed with messages from his private secretary, reminders of the day's schedule: a visit to a children's hospital, a meeting with environmental charities, a dinner with foreign dignitaries, the same endless cycle of obligations that had defined their lives for so many years. Important work, meaningful work, but work that left little room for the simple pleasures of family life. "I keep thinking about last weekend," Kate said, her voice barely above a whisper. "When we took the children to that little pub in the countryside, and for 2 hours we were just a normal family. George played football with the local children, Charlotte helped the pub owner's daughter with her drawings, and Louis fell asleep in your arms while we sat in the garden. No cameras, no security detail hovering nearby, no schedule to keep. That weekend had been a glimpse of what their life could be like. They had driven themselves in an unmarked car, worn casual clothes, and simply enjoyed being together without the weight of their titles and responsibilities. It had been perfect, and it had made their current situation feel even more suffocating. The sound of children's laughter drifted up from the courtyard below. George, Charlotte, and Louis were playing with their nanny, their joy infectious even from a distance. William and Kate watched their children, seeing in them the innocence they wanted so desperately to preserve. The decision they were contemplating would give their children something precious: the chance to choose their own paths, to make mistakes without global consequences, to fall in love without every relationship being dissected by the tabloids. "They deserve better than this," William said, his voice thick with emotion. "They deserve the chance to be children, to grow up without carrying the weight of centuries of tradition and expectation." Kate nodded, understanding the pain in his voice because she felt it too. They had both been thrust into roles they never asked for, shaped by circumstances beyond their control. William had been born into his destiny, but Kate had chosen it when she chose to love him. Now they were choosing something different, something that felt both terrifying and liberating. As the morning progressed, they went through the motions of their daily routine. William reviewed briefing papers for his environmental summit, while Kate responded to correspondence from the various charities she patronized. But their hearts weren't in it, and they both knew that this charade couldn't continue much longer. The weight of their secret pressed down on them throughout the day. At lunch with the Queen's private secretary, they maintained their usual composure, discussing upcoming engagements and royal duties. But underneath the polite conversation, they were both acutely aware that they were living a lie, going through the motions of a life they were planning to leave behind. That evening, as they tucked their children into bed, each goodnight kiss felt more precious, more significant. They were on the precipice of a decision that would change everything, not just for them, but for the institution they had served so faithfully. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new conversations, and the beginning of the most difficult period of their lives together. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to Kensington Palace. William's father arrived unannounced, his usually composed demeanor showing signs of strain. The king had heard whispers, caught fragments of conversations between staff members, and noticed the subtle changes in his son and daughter-in-law's behavior over the past few weeks. As a father and as a monarch, he couldn't ignore the growing concern that something significant was brewing. Kate was in the morning room when she heard the commotion in the entrance hall. Through the doorway, she could see William embracing his father. But the tension in both men's shoulders was unmistakable. She knew this moment would come eventually. Secrets had a way of revealing themselves in royal circles, where every glance was analyzed and every conversation was potential gossip. "We need to talk," the king said simply, his voice carrying the authority of both a parent and a sovereign. The three of them moved to William's private study, a room lined with books and family photographs that told the story of their life together. It was here, surrounded by memories of happier times, that they would have one of the most difficult conversations of their lives. William closed the door behind them and took a deep breath. He had rehearsed this moment in his mind countless times, but facing his father in person made everything feel more real, more final. Kate sat beside him on the leather sofa, her presence giving him the strength he needed to speak the words that would change everything. "We've been discussing our future," William began carefully, choosing his words with the precision that years of royal training had taught him. "Kate and I have been talking about what's best for our family, for our children, and we've come to a difficult decision." The king's face remained impassive, but Kate could see the worry in his eyes. He had been through his own struggles with duty versus personal happiness, had made sacrifices that had shaped his entire life. Now he was watching his son grapple with similar impossible choices. "We're considering stepping back," Kate said softly, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was saying. "Not immediately, and not without careful planning. But we feel that our children deserve a different kind of life than the one we've been living." The silence that followed was deafening. Outside London continued its busy rhythm, but inside this room, three people sat with the weight of history pressing down on them. The king had dedicated his entire life to the monarchy, had waited decades to wear the crown, and now his heir was contemplating walking away from it all. "I see," the king said finally, his voice carefully controlled. "And you've thought this through completely? You understand what this would mean, not just for you, but for the institution, for the country?" William leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly together. "We've thought of nothing else for months. We know the implications, we know the consequences, and we know that people will be hurt and disappointed. But we also know that we can't continue living a lie, pretending to be happy when we're slowly suffocating under the weight of expectations." Kate watched the two men she loved most in the world struggle with emotions they had been trained never to show in public. The king's disappointment was palpable, but underneath it, she could see something else: understanding. He, more than anyone, knew the cost of royal duty, the way it consumed every aspect of your personal life and left little room for authentic happiness. "The children," the king said, his voice softer now. "What about George's future? He was born to be king." That's exactly the point, William replied, his voice breaking slightly. He was born into this life without any choice in the matter. We want to give him the chance to choose for himself when he's old enough to understand what that choice means. The conversation continued for hours, covering every aspect of what such a decision would entail. The constitutional implications, the media storm that would follow, the impact on other working royals who would have to shoulder additional responsibilities. But underneath all the practical considerations was a deeper question. At what point does personal happiness become more important than duty? Kate excused herself at one point, needing a moment to compose herself. She walked through the palace, halls passing portraits of previous generations who had served the crown with varying degrees of success and personal cost. She thought about Diana, William's mother, who had struggled so publicly with the constraints of royal life. She thought about other royal couples who had found ways to balance duty with personal fulfillment, and others who had been crushed under the weight of expectation. When she returned to the study, father and son were sitting in contemplative silence. The king looked older somehow, as if the conversation had aged him in the span of a few hours. William looked relieved, as if a burden he had been carrying for months had finally been shared with someone who could understand its magnitude. If you're truly determined to do this, the king said slowly, then we need to plan it carefully. This cannot be a hasty departure or an angry exit. The monarchy has survived for over 1,000 years because it has learned to adapt, to evolve with the times. If this is what you believe is best for your family, then we will find a way to make it work. Kate felt tears prick her eyes at the unexpected support in his voice. She had feared anger, disappointment, even banishment from the family. Instead, she was hearing the words of a father who wanted his son to be happy, even if that happiness came at great personal and institutional cost. They began to discuss practical matters: timing, public relations, the children's education and security, financial arrangements. Each detail was another step away from the life they had known, and toward an uncertain but potentially liberating future. The conversation was interrupted periodically by staff members seeking approval for various matters, reminders of the machine-like efficiency required to keep the royal household functioning. As evening approached, the three of them shared a quiet dinner in Kate's private dining room. The children joined them, unaware that their entire future was being reshaped around this table. George talked excitedly about his football practice. Charlotte showed off a drawing she had made at school, and Louis charmed everyone with his 3-year-old observations about the world around him. Watching her children interact so naturally with their grandfather, Kate felt both sadness and determination. Sadness for what they would be giving up, the privilege, the security, the sense of purpose that came with royal duty. But determination to give them something more precious. The freedom to define their own lives, to make their own mistakes, to find their own happiness without the world watching their every move. The king stayed late into the evening, and as he prepared to leave, he pulled William and Kate aside one final time. "Whatever you decide," he said quietly, "you will always be my family. The institution will endure, but family is forever. I want you to remember that, in the difficult days ahead." The weeks following their conversation with the king were filled with secret meetings and careful planning. William and Kate found themselves living double lives, maintaining their public duties while privately preparing for a departure that would shock the world. Every smile for the cameras felt forced. Every public engagement felt like a performance they were no longer willing to give. Kate threw herself into her final royal duties with a bittersweet intensity. During a visit to a children's hospital, she spent extra time with each young patient, listening to their stories and offering comfort with a tenderness that came from knowing these might be among her last official acts as a royal. The doctors and nurses commented on how present she seemed, how genuinely engaged she was with everyone she met. One little girl, barely 7 years old and recovering from a serious operation, asked Kate if she was a real princess. "Yes, I suppose I am," Kate replied, kneeling down to meet the child's eyes. "But you know what? Being kind and brave like you are is much more important than any title." The child's innocent question stayed with Kate long after she left the hospital. What did it mean to be a real princess? Was it the title, the tiaras, the public duties? Or was it something deeper, something that couldn't be taken away by stepping back from royal life? She realized that her worth as a person had nothing to do with her position in the line of succession and everything to do with the love she gave to her family and the compassion she showed to others. William was having similar moments of clarity during his own engagements. At an environmental summit, he found himself speaking with more passion than he had in years about conservation and climate change. Knowing that this might be one of his last opportunities to use his platform for causes he cared about, he spoke from the heart rather than from carefully prepared talking points. "The future belongs to our children," he said during his keynote speech, his words carrying a weight that the audience couldn't fully understand. "We have a responsibility to leave them a world they can thrive in, not just survive in. That means making difficult decisions, sometimes unpopular decisions, always with their best interests at heart." The irony wasn't lost on him that he was talking about making difficult decisions for his children's future while planning the most difficult decision of his own life. After the summit, several attendees approached him to comment on how authentic and passionate he had seemed. If only they knew, he thought, that passion came from the freedom of knowing he was speaking as himself, not just as a representative of the crown. Meanwhile, the practical preparations for their departure continued in secret. They had quietly begun looking at properties outside of London, places where the children could attend normal schools and play in gardens without security cameras watching their every move. Kate spent hours researching private schools, international schools, anything that would give George, Charlotte, and Louis the chance to develop friendships based on genuine connection rather than royal protocol. The hardest part was maintaining the pretense with their children. George, at 11, was beginning to ask more sophisticated questions about their family's role and his own future responsibilities. Charlotte, ever perceptive, seemed to sense that something was changing, though she couldn't articulate what. And Louis, still young enough to live completely in the moment, served as a reminder of the innocence they were trying to preserve. One evening, as Kate was reading bedtime stories to Charlotte and Louis, her daughter looked up at her with serious eyes. "Mummy, are you sad about something?" she asked with the directness that only children possess. Kate felt her heart skip a beat. "What makes you think I'm sad, sweetheart?" "You hug us longer now," Charlotte observed. "And sometimes when you think we're not looking, you get that same look Daddy gets when he's worried about something important." The wisdom of children never ceased to amaze Kate. She pulled Charlotte closer, inhaling the sweet scent of her daughter's hair and fighting back tears. "Sometimes grown-ups have to make big decisions," she said carefully. "And even when we know it's the right thing to do, it can still feel scary." "Is it a decision about us?" Charlotte pressed gently. "Everything we do is about you," Kate replied truthfully. "You and George and Louis are the most important things in Daddy's and my life. We would do anything to make sure you're happy and safe." That conversation haunted Kate for days. She wondered if they were making the right choice, if stepping away from royal life was truly in their children's best interests, or if it was just what she and William needed to preserve their own sanity. The line between selfless parenting and personal desire seemed increasingly blurred. William was wrestling with similar doubts, particularly regarding his relationship with his father and his role in the family business of monarchy. The institution had given him purpose, identity, and a platform to make a difference in the world. Walking away felt like abandoning not just a job, but a calling that generations of his family had honored before him. But then he would come home to find Kate helping Charlotte with homework at the kitchen table, while Louis played with toy cars at their feet. And he would remember what normal family life could look like. He would think about the school plays they had missed due to royal engagements, the family dinners interrupted by urgent calls from private secretaries, the way their children's friends' parents seemed nervous around them rather than relaxed and natural. The tipping point came during a family weekend at their country home. For 2 days they had managed to live without official duties, without cameras, without the constant awareness that they were representing something larger than themselves. They cooked meals together, played board games, took long walks through the countryside, and simply enjoyed each other's company. On Sunday evening, as they prepared to return to London and resume their royal schedules, George made an observation that crystallized everything for his parents. "I wish we could stay here forever," he said wistfully. "Everything feels different when we're here. Calmer. Like we can just be ourselves. That night, after the children were asleep, William and Kate sat in their bedroom and made the final decision. They would step back from royal duties within 6 months after fulfilling their existing commitments and ensuring a smooth transition for the causes and organizations they supported. It was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. No more pretending, William said softly, taking Kate's hand in the darkness. No more performing, Kate agreed, just living. They began to draft the letter that would change their lives forever, choosing each word carefully, knowing that it would be scrutinized by millions of people around the world. But for the first time in months, they felt a sense of peace about their future, uncertain as it might be. The morning they decided to tell their children was gray and drizzly, matching the weight of the conversation that lay ahead. Kate had barely slept the night before, rehearsing different ways to explain their decision to 3 young minds who had never known any life other than the one they were about to leave behind. William sat at the breakfast table, pushing eggs around his plate while watching George read the sports section of the newspaper and Charlotte carefully braiding her doll's hair. They had chosen to have the conversation in their private sitting room, away from staff and the formalities of palace life. The room was filled with family photos, children's artwork stuck to a bulletin board, and comfortable furniture that spoke of real family life rather than royal protocol. Louis sat contentedly on Kate's lap, playing with a toy airplane, while George and Charlotte sensed the seriousness of the moment, despite their parents' attempts to keep things light. "We want to talk to you about something important," William began, his voice steady but gentle. "You know how Mummy and I are always traveling for work, and how we have to attend lots of events and meetings?" George nodded thoughtfully. At 11, he was beginning to understand the weight of his family's responsibilities. "The royal duties," he said matter-of-factly. "Like when you visit hospitals and meet with the Prime Minister." "Exactly," Kate said, impressed as always by her eldest son's perceptiveness. "Well, Daddy and I have been thinking a lot about what's best for our family, and we've decided that we want to spend more time just being a family together." Charlotte looked up from her doll, her intuitive nature picking up on the undercurrents of the conversation. "Are we moving?" she asked directly. William and Kate exchanged a look. Their daughter's ability to cut straight to the heart of matters never ceased to amaze them. "We're thinking about it," William admitted. "We're thinking about finding a place where we can have more privacy, where you can go to school without photographers following you, where we can just be normal." "But we're not normal," George said, his voice carrying a wisdom beyond his years. "We're royals. That's who we are." The simplicity of his statement broke Kate's heart. Her son had internalized his identity so completely with his royal role that he couldn't imagine existing outside of it. "You're royals, yes," she said carefully, "but you're also just George, Charlotte, and Louis. You're funny and kind and smart and brave, and those things have nothing to do with titles or palaces." Louis, still too young to fully grasp the conversation, looked up at his mother with wide eyes. "Are we going on a big adventure?" he asked with the excitement that only a 4-year-old could muster for the unknown. "Something like that," William said, his voice softening as he looked at his youngest child. "We're going to try living somewhere new, somewhere we can spend more time together as a family." The questions came in a flood then. Where would they live? What about their friends? Would they still see Granddad? Could they bring their toys and their pets? Each question was another small heartbreak for their parents, who realized how much uncertainty they were introducing into their children's previously stable world. George, ever the responsible older brother, asked the hardest question of all. "What about when I'm supposed to be king someday? If we're not doing royal duties anymore, does that mean I don't have to be king?" The silence that followed was profound. William felt the weight of generations of expectation pressing down on him as he looked at his son's earnest face. "That's a decision you'll make when you're older," he said finally. "Much older, when you understand what it means and what you want your life to look like. But someone has to be king after you," George persisted with the logic of childhood. "There are other people in the family who can do that job," William explained. "Uncle Harry, your cousins when they grow up. The most important thing is that you get to choose what makes you happy when you're old enough to make that choice." Charlotte, who had been listening quietly, suddenly burst into tears. "I don't want to leave my school," she sobbed. I don't want to leave my friends. I like my life the way it is. Kate's heart shattered as she pulled her daughter close, feeling the trembling of Charlotte's small body against her own. This was exactly what she had feared, that their children would feel uprooted and lost, that the freedom they were trying to give them would feel like punishment instead of liberation. I know it's scary, Kate whispered into Charlotte's hair. Change is always scary, even when it's for something good. But we'll be together, and that's what matters most. We'll make new friends and we'll visit the old ones. And you know what? You'll get to just be Charlotte, not Princess Charlotte. You can be messy and loud and make mistakes without everyone in the world watching. But I like being Princess Charlotte. Charlotte hiccuped through her tears. William knelt down in front of his daughter, taking her hands in his. You'll always be Princess Charlotte in your heart, he said softly. That's something no one can ever take away from you. But now you'll also get to discover all the other wonderful things you are besides being a princess. The conversation continued for over an hour, with the children cycling through excitement, confusion, fear, and cautious acceptance. George worried about disappointing people who expected him to follow in his father's footsteps. Charlotte grieved for the security of the only life she had ever known. Louis remained largely oblivious to the magnitude of the change, focused instead on the promise of new adventures and different playgrounds. Later that afternoon, as the children played in the garden under the watchful eye of their nanny, William and Kate stood at the window and watched them. The weight of what they were doing felt heavier now that their children knew. The abstract concept of stepping back from royal life had become concrete in the faces of three young people, whose worlds they were about to turn upside down. Are we being selfish? Kate asked, voicing the doubt that had been gnawing at her since Charlotte's tears. William considered the question seriously. I don't know, he admitted. Maybe. But I think we're also being honest about what kind of parents and people we want to be. And maybe that's worth something too. That evening they held a family meeting to discuss practical matters, schools, houses, new routines. The children peppered them with questions that ranged from the practical to the absurd, and slowly, the idea of a different life began to feel less threatening and more like an adventure. As they tucked the children into bed that night, each good night felt like a small goodbye to the life they had all known. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as they began the delicate process of extricating themselves from royal duties while maintaining the dignity and grace that had defined their public service. George, as his father kissed him goodnight, whispered a question that would stay with William for weeks to come. Daddy, will people hate us for leaving? William paused, his hand on his son's forehead. Some people might be disappointed, he said honestly. But the people who truly love us will understand that we're doing what we think is best for our family. And that's what matters most. The announcement was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in March, when the spring light was just beginning to warm the palace walls. William and Kate had spent weeks crafting their statement, working with communications experts to find words that would convey their gratitude for the opportunities they had been given, while explaining their decision to step back. Every sentence had been scrutinized, every phrase weighed for its potential impact on public opinion and the stability of the monarchy. The night before the announcement, Kate found herself walking through the rooms of Kensington Palace that had been her home for so many years. Each space held memories. The nursery where she had rocked her babies to sleep, the kitchen where she had tried to maintain some semblance of normal family life, the drawing room where they had hosted dignitaries and celebrities, but also intimate family gatherings. In William's study, she paused at his desk, where the final draft of their statement lay waiting. The words seemed inadequate to capture the complexity of their decision, the months of agonizing deliberation, the love for their country and the institution they were stepping away from. How do you explain to millions of people that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to walk away? William found her there, standing in the doorway as if reluctant to enter a space that would soon belong to someone else. Second thoughts? He asked gently, though he knew the answer. They had passed the point of second thoughts weeks ago. Third and fourth thoughts, Kate admitted with a weak smile, but not doubts. Not anymore. The morning of the announcement dawned clear and bright, as if the universe was offering them one final gift of beautiful weather before the storm that would surely follow. They had breakfast with the children as usual, helping with homework and discussing plans for the day, maintaining the normalcy that had become so precious to them. At precisely 11 o'clock, The statement was released simultaneously to all major news outlets and posted on the official royal social media accounts. William and Kate sat together in their private sitting room, watching the news coverage on television with a mixture of relief and anxiety. The words they had chosen with such care were now out in the world, subject to interpretation and analysis by everyone from constitutional experts to ordinary citizens who had followed their story for years. The statement was elegant in its simplicity. After careful consideration and many months of reflection, we have decided to step back from our roles as senior working royals. This decision has not been made lightly, but we believe it is in the best interest of our family and will allow us to focus on raising our children with the privacy and normalcy that every child deserves. We remain committed to supporting Her Majesty and the Commonwealth in whatever way we can, and we are grateful for the understanding of the British people as we navigate this transition. The reaction was immediate and intense. News anchors struggled to find precedent for such a decision. Constitutional experts debated the implications for the line of succession, and social media exploded with opinions ranging from supportive to outraged. The hashtag #William and Kate decision began trending worldwide. Within minutes of the announcement, Kate's phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends and family members who had learned the news, from the media rather than from her directly. Each text message was a reminder of how many relationships would be affected by their decision, how many people would feel shocked or betrayed by the suddenness of the announcement. The children were at school when the news broke, protected temporarily from the chaos that was erupting in the outside world. William and Kate had arranged for additional security at the school and had briefed the headmaster about the situation, but they knew that their children's lives had just changed forever, whether they understood it yet or not. By midday, crowds had gathered outside Kensington Palace, some holding supportive signs, others expressing disappointment and anger. The mix of emotions reflected the broader public reaction, understanding from some quarters, bewilderment from others, and a deep sense of loss from those who had seen William and Kate as the perfect royal couple, the future of the monarchy. Television news programs cleared their schedules to provide continuous coverage of the story. Royal correspondents who had covered the couple for years found themselves analyzing every aspect of their decision, looking for clues in recent public appearances, searching for signs that they had missed. The speculation was endless. Was it the pressure of royal life, the memory of Diana's struggles, the desire to protect their children from the same fate? Kate watched a particularly harsh commentary from a royal expert who accused them of abandoning their duty and betraying the trust of the British people. The words stung, even though she had prepared herself for criticism. It was one thing to know intellectually that people would be angry. It was another to hear that anger expressed with such vehemence on national television. "Turn it off," William said quietly, reaching for the remote. "We don't need to torture ourselves by listening to every opinion." But Kate found herself unable to look away from the coverage. These were the people they had served for over a decade, the public whose opinion had mattered so much to them. Seeing the disappointment and anger in the faces of those who had once cheered for them at public events was harder than she had anticipated. The afternoon brought a parade of official responses. The Prime Minister issued a statement thanking them for their service and wishing them well in their future endeavors. Other members of the royal family released carefully worded messages of support, though the strain was visible in their diplomatic language. The Queen's statement was brief and dignified, expressing her love for her grandson and his family, while affirming the monarchy's commitment to its duties. As the children returned from school, William and Kate braced themselves for their reactions to the media coverage. George had heard whispers from classmates. Charlotte was confused by the extra security presence, and Louis remained blissfully unaware of the significance of the day. "Everyone at school was talking about us," George reported with the matter-of-fact tone of a child who had grown up in the public eye. "My teacher said people are saying things on the news, but she wouldn't let us watch it." Kate knelt down to meet her son's eyes, seeing in them a maturity that no 11-year-old should have to possess. "People have strong feelings about our decision," she explained. "Some people understand and some people are upset. But what matters most is that we love each other, and we're doing what we think is right for our family." "Are we in trouble?" Charlotte asked, her voice small and worried. "No, sweetheart," William assured her, pulling her into a hug. "We're not in trouble. Sometimes adults have to make difficult decisions, and not everyone agrees with those decisions. But we're not in trouble, and we're going to be just fine. That evening, after the children were asleep, William and Kate sat together in the quiet of their sitting room, surrounded by the remnants of their old life. The day had been exhausting, emotionally draining, and yet somehow liberating. They had crossed a line from which there was no return, and despite the criticism and chaos, they felt a sense of peace they hadn't experienced in years. "It's done," Kate said softly, leaning against William's shoulder. "After all these months of planning and worrying, it's finally done." William wrapped his arm around her, both of them acutely aware that this might be one of their last quiet evenings in the palace that had been their home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more media scrutiny, difficult conversations with palace staff, and the complex process of extricating themselves from dozens of official commitments and patronages. But tonight, for just a few hours, they could sit together in the silence and feel the weight of their decision settling around them like a blanket. They had chosen love over duty, family over institution, authenticity over performance. Only time would tell if they had chosen wisely. But in this moment, holding each other in the fading light of their royal life, they knew they had chosen with their hearts. The phone continued to ring, messages continued to flood in, and the world continued to spin with the news of their departure. But in the quiet sanctuary of their sitting room, William and Kate allowed themselves to simply be husband and wife. Parents planning a different future for their children, two people who had found the courage to choose their own path, even when that path led away from everything they had once thought defined them. 6 months after the announcement that shocked the world, William and Kate stood in the doorway of their new home, watching their children explore the sprawling garden that would be their playground. The house was smaller than Kensington Palace, nestled in the countryside far from the scrutiny of London media, but it felt infinitely larger in the space it offered for genuine family life. George ran ahead of his siblings, his school uniform replaced by jeans and a football shirt, his laughter echoing across the open space without concern for who might be listening. Charlotte had discovered a climbing tree and was already planning the treehouse she would build with her father's help. Louis chased after butterflies with the pure joy of a child who had never known that freedom was something you had to fight for. The transition had been more difficult than they had anticipated. The media attention following their announcement had been relentless, with photographers camped outside every property they viewed, reporters analyzing their every move for signs of regret or satisfaction. The children had struggled with leaving their friends and the security of the only life they had ever known. There had been tears, tantrums, and moments when William and Kate wondered if they had made a terrible mistake. But gradually, slowly, a new kind of life had begun to emerge. George had joined a local football team where he was simply George, not Prince George. His teammates cared more about his ability to score goals than his position in the line of succession. For the first time in his life, he had friends who invited him over for dinner without elaborate security arrangements or formal protocols. Charlotte had enrolled in art classes at the village community center, where she could paint and draw without anyone analyzing her work for signs of royal breeding or future artistic inclination. Her teacher praised her creativity and encouraged her wild imagination, never knowing or caring that she was instructing a former princess. Even Louis, too young to fully understand what they had given up, seemed to thrive in the freedom of their new life. He could run through the garden, climb trees, get dirty, and be loud without anyone worrying about maintaining royal dignity or setting a proper example. Kate had thrown herself into the role of ordinary mother with an enthusiasm that surprised even her. She drove carpool, attended parent-teacher conferences, and volunteered at the school fair alongside other parents who gradually stopped treating her like a celebrity and began to see her as just another mom trying to do her best for her children. The hardest part had been letting go of the causes and charities that had given her purpose for so many years. She had spent weeks personally calling the organizations she had patronized, explaining her decision and helping them transition to new royal patrons. Many had been understanding, but some had expressed disappointment that bordered on betrayal. William had found the adjustment even more challenging. He had been born into royal duty, had never known any other purpose or identity. Without the structure of official engagements and the clear sense of service that had defined his adult life, he sometimes felt lost and unmoored. He had begun volunteering with local environmental groups, using his expertise and passion for conservation in a more grassroots way. But it was a profound adjustment from the global platform he had once commanded. The public reaction had eventually settled into a grudging acceptance, though opinion remained divided. Polls showed that while many people understood their desire for privacy and normal family life, others felt abandoned by the couple they had once seen as the future of the monarchy. The institution itself had adapted, with other working royals taking on additional duties and new patronages, but the absence of William and Kate was keenly felt at many official functions. The king had visited them twice since they had moved, bringing gifts for the children and careful updates about family news. The relationship remained warm but complicated, with the weight of institutional disappointment underlying every conversation. He loved his son and daughter-in-law, supported their right to choose their own path, but couldn't entirely hide his sadness at what the monarchy had lost. On this particular evening, as they watched their children play in the golden light of late summer, William and Kate reflected on the year that had transformed their lives. The constant anxiety that had plagued them during their final months as working royals had gradually faded, replaced by a different kind of contentment. They still faced challenges, financial pressures, security concerns, and the ongoing attention of media that refused to let them disappear completely. But they faced these challenges as a united family. Without the weight of representing an entire institution, Kate prepared dinner in their own kitchen, without a team of chefs and service staff, finding unexpected joy in the ordinary task of feeding her family. William helped with homework, read bedtime stories, and tucked his children into beds in rooms they had chosen and decorated themselves. These simple acts of family life, once squeezed between official duties and public appearances, now formed the rhythm of their days. As night fell and the children finally came inside, exhausted and happy from their day of freedom, William and Kate sat together on their back porch, listening to the sounds of the countryside around them. No photographers lurked in the bushes. No security detail monitored their every movement. No private secretary would arrive in the morning with a schedule of obligations. "Do you miss it?" Kate asked, a question they had both been afraid to voice for months. William considered carefully before answering. "I miss the sense of purpose," he said honestly. "I miss feeling like I was making a difference on a grand scale. I miss some of the people, the causes we supported, the feeling that we were serving something bigger than ourselves." Kate nodded, understanding completely. "But do you regret it?" This time William's answer came without hesitation. "No," he said, reaching for her hand. "Look at them." Through the window they could see their children getting ready for bed, brushing teeth and arguing over whose turn it was to choose a bedtime story. George was helping Charlotte reach the bathroom sink. Louis was singing a silly song he had learned at school, and all three were being gloriously, messily, authentically themselves. "They're just children," Kate observed with wonder, as if seeing her own kids clearly for the first time. Not future monarchs or representatives of anything, just three kids who laugh too loud and get grass stains on their clothes and worry about ordinary things like math tests and making friends. "They're free," William said softly. "We gave them what we never had, the freedom to choose who they want to become." Later that night, after the children were asleep and the house had settled into quiet, William and Kate lay in bed talking softly about their plans for the future. They spoke of travel they wanted to do as a family, of careers they might pursue, of the simple pleasures of a life lived without constant public scrutiny. Kate had been offered several opportunities to work with charities and organizations in a private capacity, using her experience and passion for causes she cared about, without the formal structure of royal patronage. William was considering environmental consulting work, applying his expertise in conservation to help businesses and communities develop sustainable practices. They were building a new life from scratch, and while it was uncertain and sometimes scary, it was theirs to build. Every decision they made was based on what they thought was best for their family, not on what was expected of them by tradition or public opinion. As Kate drifted off to sleep, she thought about the little girl in the hospital who had asked if she was a real princess. She had answered yes at the time, but now she understood the question differently. Being a real princess, she realized, had nothing to do with titles or tiaras. It was about being true to yourself, protecting the people you love, and having the courage to choose authenticity over expectation. Outside their window, The English countryside stretched peaceful and dark, offering them the anonymity and freedom they had sacrificed so much to achieve. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys, but it would be a tomorrow of their own choosing. In stepping away from their royal roles, William and Kate had found something more precious than any crown. They had found themselves, and they had given their children the chance to find themselves too. Their silent farewell had moved millions to tears, not just because they were leaving, but because they were leaving with such grace, such dignity, and such obvious love for each other and their children. They had shown the world that sometimes the greatest act of service is knowing when to step aside, and that true nobility lies not in titles or ceremonies, but in the courage to live authentically and love completely.